Welcome to the With You Rugby Podcast, designed to give you an in-depth look at the United States Rugby Foundation, including our grant programs and recipients, fundraisers, events, and much more. Now let's get started. Hello, I'm Brian Vizard, President of the United States Rugby Foundation, and I want to welcome you to another one of our With You podcast as we get closer to the 2021 US Rugby Hall of Fame induction ceremony sponsored by Penn Mutual. We thought it'd be a good idea to get to know this year's inductees and special award recipients just a little bit better. And today we welcome in past U.S. team manager Tristan Lewis and a 2021 Hall of Fame inductee. Welcome, Tristan.
Morning, Brian. Good to be on the show.
Hey, Tristan, let's start from the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and some of the sports you played as a kid.
Okay, so obviously by accent, it's pretty obvious that I'm a UK resident. Grew up in London. Went to school at Ealing Grammar School. That was my first introduction to rugby. Played rugby at school from 11 to 18. Then went to London University, played rugby at London University. And, then played club rugby because obviously back in those days, there wasn't any professional setup or anything like that. So you just joined a club and you went from there. Ealing Grammar School had a long association with local clubs in the Middlesex area, and I joined one of those. I'd had the privilege of, as a schoolboy, of playing Middlesex schools rugby, so I'd been a county rugby player. It sounds pretty impressive, but a lot of kids get to do it, so I don't feel that special about being a county rugby player. I'd have felt real special about being a Middlesex county player back in the days of the county championship when Middlesex played Lancashire and Yorkshire, and guys were vying for spots on the England team. That would have been a true honour. But playing at the schoolboy level, there's a lot of kids out there playing rugby. So then I went into club rugby. Spent some time with a club called Old Gatonians in just north of Wembley in Middlesex, and then went on to join London Welsh. And at London Welsh, I was at London Welsh in the great era of Welsh rugby. So a lot of our team were Welsh players and British Lions. Got to know the JPRs and the Mike Roberts and individuals that, are in their own halls of fame now. And in some cases have made this British Lions greatest of all time team. So that was a great privilege to play with those guys. But my rugby career was actually going on around my rowing. I rowed for my school. And then when I got older, my first inclination was towards fast cars. I wanted to be a racing car driver. So I did a bunch of motor racing and everything else, and rugby kind of fit in around that schedule more than me thinking the other stuff fit in around my rugby schedule. I had the privilege to play on some select sides and tour some interesting places. One of my early visits to the United States was playing for a team called the Public School Wanderers. And we played in Philadelphia in a thing called the Liberty Bowl tournament. And then we went down to the Caribbean and played in Miami and the Bahamas and Cayman Islands. So had some fun with those tours and everything else. But that was back in the good old days of amateur rugby. And then obviously I came to the States in 77, lived on the East Coast, played some rugby with Old Blue, New York. And then from the East Coast, I actually did a bit of a tour. I went to LA. From LA, I went to Miami, and Miami brought me to Chicago. And when I got to Chicago in 84, I joined the Chicago Lions. By then, I was in my young 40s, for want of a different description. And so playing rugby wasn't as important to me as to be able to contribute to the sport, because it'd always been a love of mine. And that got me, everybody wanted to be a coach, and it seemed like there needed to be somebody else to, for want of a different description, fill water bowls, right? So I became a club manager, and then went on, obviously, serving with the Lions, became the VP of playing, and obviously I had a management background in the sense that I'd worked in team management in motorsport and everything else. So, it was and that's what led me into, rugby management.
Well, let before we talk about your manager skills, we all know those a little bit, but what were you like as a player? What positions you play? You talked a little bit about rep rugby, but how would you evaluate yourself if you were scouting Tristan Lewis? What would be some of the accolades you'd say about him?
Oh, the first comment I'd say is he's a journeyman rugby player. He's a journeyman front row player. I was a tight head prop. Every once in a while, I was made to play on the loose head side. When I first stepped on a rugby field at the age of 11, I thought I was a back. That lasted about 2 weeks when our school rugby coach shifted me over towards the pack, and I thought I could be a flanker. And before I knew it, I was playing in the front row. So obviously that's where I ended up, and I kind of liked it, because if there's one thing about being a forward is you're involved in absolutely everything, and if you're involved as a prop, then you are definitely involved in everything. So it was a position that kept you busy. And back in the days when we had 30 plus scrums a game, when you were a prop, you were pretty important to the whole deal. So that's kind of where I ended up, and that's kind of where I stayed.
You said you're involved in motorsports. I just watched Ford versus Ferrari not too long ago. Did you enjoy that movie?
Yeah, I love that movie. Obviously, and the funny part is that I know some of the participants in that movie, not in the movie itself, but from the actual history in '66. I mean, some of those characters are characters that I've personally spent time with. So it's great when you see those individuals and you see their contributions to their sport. It's kind of inspiring to watch management and how it's done, and the fights that go on that people don't want to talk about. The bits where you've got to walk in a room and lay it on the line, or otherwise it's not going to happen.
Now you came to the States. You mentioned that from London, New York, in the late 1970s. Rugby didn't you bring you over here, right? Did work bring you over to the States?
Yeah, work brought me here. Yeah, I came here to manage a motor racing team. So
okay,
that brought me here, and rugby was my getaway from work.
And you said you mentioned you hooked up with the old Blue Rugby Club. A lot of famous names and characters from that team. What were some of your memories from your days with Old Blue?
Well, so the reason I went to Old Blue as a rugby club, because obviously there was plenty of choice in New York, was that I'd actually, on one of my public school wanderer tours down to the Caribbean, I'd met a guy by the name of Tom Holmes, who was a diehard Old Blue guy who went on to be their president of the club, and Tom's still fairly heavily involved in Old Blue rugby in New York, and he and I built up a pretty strong relationship, and that's what took me to Old Blue. So if anybody's got any complaints about my time at Old Blue, address them all to Tom Holmes. It's his fault. But yeah, Tommy was the guy that dragged me, that got me to go to Old Blue. And then obviously I was there when, Mike Sherlock, who obviously became an Eagle, was playing and everything else. So he was the guy that, you all wanted to either play alongside or if you could do it, beat him out of a spot on the Old Blue 15.
And then you went from a storied club in New York to a storied one in the Midwest, Chicago Lions. I mean, I remember when I first started playing in 1978 in Michigan, the Lions were the team in the Midwest, and everybody kind of looked up to them, emulated them. What were some of your highlights from your days with the Lions?
My highlights with days with the Lions were the fact that you were always the Lions had a different approach to rugby to most of the clubs I'd seen in the Midwest, and especially our crosstown rival called the Griffins. The difference was that the Lions were always trying to get measured by playing against Ombak or the Gentlemen of Aspen or Denver Barbarians. They were always looking to go play somebody at the highest level, whereas and gauge their stature by those games rather than the Griffins who gauge their stature by beating the Lions, right? If you could beat the Lions. So that storied Lions thing was that, there was this thing called the Mid-America Cup, which was the Midwest Championship. And, there's a couple of teams that have their name on that trophy twice. And, and the Lions had their name on that trophy 16 times. So there was, without a doubt, that club had a solid base. One of the other things that it had was it had a management group that weren't all players. Most clubs in the Midwest were run by players, not by old boys or anything like that. They were run by the current membership, and the Lions wasn't. The Lions had a plan. They had a clubhouse. They had a plan. They knew where they wanted to go, and they were prepared to take the time to do it. And that's really the bit that impressed me the most. And once I joined the club and I start to meet some of the characters, all of which went on to be, presidents of the club, that they were devoted to what they were doing. And so it's always great to be working with a group where everybody's pulling in the same direction, and they all want to go to the next level, whatever that level may be. Joining the Super League was a question mark that came to the management committee when I was on the management committee, and we didn't hesitate to say yes. We then hesitated when we worked out how much it was going to cost us, but we still didn't stop us from saying yes, because we needed to be challenged, and that was going to be the challenge. So that was the bit that got me about being with the Lions. That, and obviously they had a bar that you could go to on a Thursday and a Saturday, which was in their own building. So.
Was it a difficult transition from you to go to player to administrator or manager?
No, not at all. Not at all. One of the things that I'd learned from managing other entities, in motorsports and everything else, was that you really have to stick to, if you're going to be any good in this role, you have to stick to the ethos of players play, coaches coach, managers manage. And so it was real easy for me to step away from being a player into an administrative role, because I had that ethos in my brain already from other sports, and that allowed me to make the transition pretty quickly. Were there times when I thought I could do a better job than the guy on the field? Absolutely. But then who doesn't, right? I mean, we watch internationals and think, we can do a better job than them. And I know for a fact that we can't, but in our minds we can.
And you went on to have a great career managing the men's national sevens team, the national 15s team, the women's sevens team. And I know what goes into being a manager, but if there's a young man or a woman out there that's thinking, hey, maybe I could be a manager too on one of these national teams, tell us a little bit about what you did as a manager for those teams.
Well, obviously it starts from the very beginning, right? So from the moment that you know the schedule for for the team that you're managing, is when the preparation for what you need to do for them starts. So if you can get the powers to be to confirm that, for argument's sake, that you're going to attend, the Hong Kong Sevens, then you can start planning immediately for what needs to go into that situation. When do you want to meet? You get with the coach, you find out what he wants as a time schedule, and then you start building it. International sevens is easier than doing 15s, because generally you're not responsible for finding your own hotel or worrying about ground transportation, all that type of stuff. That's already being, if you like, provided by the event organizer. In 15s, none of that's being provided. So one of the first things you need to do is decide, okay, are we going to have a hotel that's near where we want to train? And by the way, where are we going to train? So it's about finding the right facilities, building the plan around those, getting those all confirmed. If you've got a little bit of extra money in the budget, then you try and go and look at everything so that it's a personal situation where you've now met the hotel manager personally rather than on the day you arrive, right? So it's about being in advance of everything else that you think the team's going to need. And what you think the team's going to need is developed by your talks with the coach. It's real important as a manager that you build the relationships with all of the other staff, so that no matter when you need to call them, they're going to answer your phone, whether it be a coach, a doctor, a trainer, whoever it may be. You need to have those relationships. So the first thing I would say to you is you need to be detail oriented. You need to understand concepts of schedules. And you need to know that if you think you can do it in 2 weeks, then you better give yourself 4. And if you think it's going to take 4, you better give yourself 8. And if you're talking about a 3-week tour in Europe, then you better give yourself 6 months to get everything sorted the way it should be. Now, and you need it all sorted, dotted, so that at least a month out, you can send every player, every person traveling, everything that's going to happen for the next 3 weeks in 3 different countries. So it's just about that attention to detail, dotting I's and crossing T's all the way through.
Did you prefer 7s over 15s or equally the same?
So once you've done a 15s tour, 7s is a doddle. I mean, it really is relatively simple. I mean, I'm not, it's one of those jobs where for a start off, in the day it was 12 players, 1 manager, a physio and a coach. So there were 16 of you. The average 15s tour was 28 players and anywhere between 8 and 12 staff in the beginning, and now it's anywhere between 8 and 15 staff. So, and I mean, my last World Cup in 2015, we took 46 people. A lot harder to herd the cats with 46 than it is with only 16 of them running around.
Right. Now, Tristan, have you ever figured out how many test matches you did, 15s and 7s and women's 7s and the World Cups involved? What's that tally like?
So the World Cup stuff's real easy because obviously, that they're pretty straightforward. So obviously I did the 99 World Cup, not as a team manager, but as a USA representative, because at that time I was the Vice-President of USA Rugby. I didn't go on the 2003 World Cup. And obviously when 2007 came around, I wasn't involved with the team at that point in time. We'd also gone through that bankruptcy and individuals, Tom Billups and I had been working together, and then we both stepped away from our roles because the circumstances weren't, well, I'm going to say that the internal politics of USA Rugby meant that it wasn't a place that I wanted to be in. But I did 2011 and 2015 with the 15s men. I did 2005 and 2009 with 7s. Take that back. 2005 with 7s men and 2009 with 7s women. Those are the World Cups that I've attended in the role of a team manager. And then we did when I announced my retirement to the group back in 2015 that I was going to step away from the role because I wasn't prepared to sign on for another 4 years. Because if you commit to the job as an Eagles manager, then you're committing to 4 years. And I felt that in 2015, at my age, I mean, I'm coming up on my 70th birthday, so I felt I probably should hand this off to a younger guy. So I made arrangements to bring a guy on board to do it. I built it into the budget to make it work, and everything else for the 2016 budget, knowing I was leaving in 2015. And they then made me do the count. And I worked with Kurt Uhler, who I consider to be the preeminent historian of USA Eagles. He spent a lot of time putting together a database and everything else. And I worked out every test match I'd ever done. And it turned out I'd done 85 test matches. And I joke all the time to players that, if they gave caps to managers, then I'd be the most capped person in US rugby history.
Tristan, looking back on all those tours and all those matches, was there a tour that stood out or a game that stood out for you and in your role and just the enjoyment of it?
Well, I enjoyed every single tour. Obviously, if you came back with a winning record, it was a better tour, just because it's so much easier to be a winner than it is to have to explain why you didn't win. But tours that stood out to me, my first ever trip to Wellington. Absolutely amazing, absolutely blown away by the 7s tournament in the Cape Tin at Wellington. Just an amazing event and everything else. And I made some great friendships at the liaison that I had at my very first 7s event in Wellington became our lead liaison for us in 2011 when we went there for the Rugby World Cup. In 15s, there's never a better day, and there's never a better day as a USA Rugby guy than beating Canada. I mean, my first ever USA international as a working guy, for want of a different description, was us losing. It was us having a game where we lost to Ireland on one week and beat Canada the following. And it might be the other way around. We beat Canada and then we lost to Ireland in New Hampshire. And that weekend of working the event and everything else, the feeling of beating Canada. And even though what I consider to be one of the great guys in US Rugby, Jack Clark, turned around to me and said, it's a very poor Canada side. It's good to get that win under our belts, right? Beating Canada has always been a highlight. And I was around when we were losing to Canada, and obviously with Eddie O'Sullivan, we pulled off one victory, which scared the Canadians to death in the World Cup qualifier, to the point where, they were wondering how they would manage financially to be able to go down to South America, because obviously whoever lost that series normally ends up going to South America. And obviously we lost the second game, unfortunately, and we were the ones that went to South America. But from that start to then being with Mike Tolkien, where basically we never lost to Canada. It was always all those trips, whether it be with the A side when we would do the forerunner to what then became the Pan American Tour, the USA Six Nations type program. What that situation, was always the best. Beating Canada was always a highlight for me.
Was there a favorite team you had of all the years that you managed the groups? Was there a favorite team you played or had under you?
Yeah, so I'd say there's two. 2003 men's 15s. 2003 men's 15s and 2015 men's 15s. Those two groups of players had gelled and grown together over a period of time where they epitomized to me what it takes to be a USA Rugby international. They were by far the most dedicated, those teams. It was always tough for me to get them to stop doing stuff. I'd be the guy saying, hey, our field contract ran out at 2 and we're still here at 2:30. No, we're not done. We need to finish this. And they weren't finishing things because practice had run long. They were finishing things because they individually were developing skills and stuff like that. And they just never quit. And obviously, I'm going to be sharing the Hall of Fame with guys that are all 2003. I call them player heroes to every kid coming through American rugby, and that's emotionally tough for me in the sense that, it's hard for me not to break down when I think of how great those guys were and how they've continued on in the game, giving back, which is what we're all here to. I think that's what we're meant to do, right? We get as high up the food chain as we can, and then our job is to make sure that we distribute the food, and that's kind of where we're at.
Now, Tristan, I know from past experience, the Eagle coach or the Eagle captain and the manager always form a strong bond on these tours. Was there one Eagle captain that really stood out to you that was just an unbelievable player and captain?
Chris Wiles. Chris to me was, he's there are guys that in the amateur semi-pro era that stand out to you as role models, and one of those, so getting away from just the captain, one of the players that I used to use all the time as a role model was a guy called Philip Eloff. He was a Lion but became an Eagle, and I would always use him as a role model. And Chris Wiles was always my epitome of the ultimate professional, doing everything that it took to get it right. and always someone that when you asked him a question, you got a straight answer. And yeah, just a great guy. And yeah, I really enjoyed my time with Chris as our captain.
And Tristan, looking back on your long career in rugby, and you may have already mentioned it earlier in this podcast, but what's your favorite memory in rugby?
Favorite memory in rugby? 9/11 celebration in New Zealand.
What transpired there?
Well, we were 9/11 obviously has a real meaning to Americans, and to me personally. We'd had a New York firefighter describe his experiences that day, and we had him give out jerseys at a jersey presentation prior to the game against Ireland, and we'd had a church service and a remembrance service with the ambassador, with a US Marine Bugle Corps and everything in New Zealand. And it was a pretty, I mean, I come from a nation that knows how to do pomp and ceremony pretty good, but we had, that was an amazing day. I think that got into absolutely everyone, and certainly inspired the players to play as well as they did. It was unfortunate we didn't win that game, but at the same time, I don't think Ireland expected us to play as well as we did on that day. You know, they would have considered that this was an easy 30-point victory, and obviously it never turned out that way. You know, and so yeah, pretty amazing day.
How about your most rewarding experience in rugby?
Oh, without a doubt, entering the Hall of Fame. To think that people think I'm worthy of that, yeah, that makes it all worthwhile.
And how about your proudest moment in rugby? I mean, you might have just said it just now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the proudest moment was when you called me and told me I was in. that would have been instantly, you know. That's, I mean, if I look at, you know, what else goes with it, you know, what else goes with it is watching players go on in their lives and be these great human beings that they become, and how well they do in their community and how well they give back. Knowing those guys and thinking that you might have helped shape some of what they do in their life, you know, with your role as a manager, then yeah, that's also it. I mean, the success of the individuals, once you get past team success, and this is team, no I in that, but once you get past team success, then, you know, seeing the development of the players around you and where they go on, you know, guys that were playing rugby are now at the forefront of MLR, you know, they're at the forefront of all sorts of different things that are going on in US rugby at this time. They're giving back, and they're doing it in a most spectacular manner in some cases.
Now, finally, one last question, Tristan. If there's somebody out there that is watching this and saying, gosh, Tristan really gave back to the game, I'd love to follow in his footsteps, one piece of advice for any up-and-coming aspiring administrators?
Simply don't do it because you're the last guy in the food chain. Do it because you want to do it. Because in the beginning, you're going to think you're going to think no one's... you're going to think you're doing a thankless task. They won't in the beginning come up to you and pat you on the back. So you've got to have broad shoulders, and you've got to be prepared to make some hard decisions. And sometimes your conversations with coaches, and you have to remember that as a manager, you have a role which is also managing your coach, his expectations. You know, if he thinks that he can do something that you know can't be done, then you have to be able to tell him. So you have to be able to have broad shoulders to face down your coach. And there's some pretty strong individuals who call themselves coach that you have to get in front of and say, no, we can't do that. So yeah, the thing is that you have to want to do it, because you're going to be putting in 14, 16-hour days every day you're on tour, and you're going to need to be the last guy up, and you're going to be the first guy up in the morning and the last guy to go to sleep at night. And your phone's always going to ring when you don't want it to. So it's nice if you can get a waterproof phone, because you should probably take it in the shower with you, because it's amazing how many calls you get when you don't think you're going to get called. So you just have to really want it, because if you don't want it, it'll get away from you.
Yeah, Tristan, thank you so much for spending the time with us today, and congratulations once again on your Hall of Fame induction, and really looking forward to seeing you in Las Vegas.
I look forward to it as well, Brian. Thanks a lot.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for today's With You podcast. We're going to have more of these in the future, especially in the lead up to the Rugby Hall of Fame weekend. Sign up for our newsletter at usrugbyfoundation.org. And for more information about the Hall of Fame weekend, go to usrugbyfoundation.org/Hall of Fame, all one word, to find out more about the induction ceremony, the scramble, and all the other things going around that weekend. Thank you again for taking part in the With You podcast. And until next time, stay safe, everyone.